I'm going to talk a little bit about standards in the terms of national standards bodies. And this is something that maybe some of you are involved in, if you put your hand up. 2. Okay, this is not a surprise. I'll talk a little bit about the ISO Technical Committee 267, and I'll talk about standards and ISO standards and the part you need to play in how they develop going forward. So why bother with standards? That's typically what people immediately think about when you start on the topic of standards. It's not exactly the most exciting thing to either talk about and, trust me, to get involved in. But I want to tell you a little story very quickly, because, Mr. Chairman, you can remind me if I'm running out of time. But I want to tell a little story that's actually quite poignant from the remark that Tony made earlier about Tony and Johnny's debate about which comes first, facilities or real estate. I spoke at a real estate property management conference about 10 years ago. It was actually in Spain. And I was the only person there talking about facilities management. And I made what I thought was a bit tongue-in-cheek joke. And I said to the audience, who were all professional property management real estate directors in the main of large global organizations, and I said, of course, you will all realize that property management and real estate management is actually a subset of facilities management. And I expected a few grins and chuckles from the audience. Nothing. Dead straight, not one laugh, nothing. So I then went on to try and explain why facilities management was so important. But the very, very interesting thing about that conference was at the end, one of the other speakers, who happened to be a global director of real estate for his organization, actually said to me, "Stan, you're right." And I truly didn't expect that reaction from anybody. He said, "But." It's a big but. He said, until you guys start talking one language and have standards that can be understood and acknowledged internationally, nobody's going to take you seriously. That was the day I got involved in this stuff, in standards, because he was absolutely right. We heard some conversations this morning about recognition, professionalism, the C-suite and being on the board and things like that. We don't deserve that until we start speaking with one voice, until we start having an educational structure, until we have standards that can be acceptable to business and commerce and government. Because it doesn't actually matter if we think they're fantastic. It's what they think that's actually important. And you've already heard today a lot of the work that's being done in the organizations represented here to try and make that happen. So let me give you the other dimension around standards within the standards world. Probably none of you will recognize this man. This is William Thompson, 1st Baron Kelvin. And he's somebody that I love what he said. You probably don't know about him, but you actually know what he invented. And the hint is in the name. He was the guy that invented the measurement of temperature. So the real measurement of temperature is Kelvin, not Fahrenheit and centigrade. And he made a statement that is often misquoted. To measure is to know. If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. And we actually think about that. That's true. So if you have to measure whatever you want to measure, you have to have standards against which you're going to measure it. And that, for me, is the big message around all the competencies and certifications in education. We are all setting those standards. So who creates the standards? We all do. In your organizations, you're creating the de facto standards that are acceptable to your organizations, to the people that you serve, to your customers, etc. And what you need to realize is you have got as much to give to these processes as these processes have to give to you, because you've all got that value to contribute into this process. I do a lot of work around the world, and I'm doing a lot of work at the moment in emerging economies. I've actually done quite a lot of work in Brazil and in Mexico in terms of Latin America. And whilst there might not be the structure and the formalization of it, it's happening, it's there. You guys are all doing it. And what we're here all collectively trying to do is to bring all of that together so that we start to speak with that one voice. And then we'll have credibility wherever we want to go. So facilities management standards, a bit of the background. Who's doing that? There's two colleagues here from ABRAFAC. Can you stand up? I can see one, I can't see the other. For those of you in Latin America, that we're talking this morning about establishing associations and getting that one voice, and how do we go about doing that? Grab these guys in the next 2 days. ABRAFAC in Brazil is at the early stages, but very successful in what they're doing. And I'll repeat what I said at the workshop this morning. You do not need to reinvent the wheel. Please don't. There's a wealth of information and knowledge sitting up here right now, but there's also a wealth of knowledge amongst yourselves. And this is the real benefit of this Congress. Make good use of it. Euro FM next year, I believe, 25 years. They've been trying to make that collaboration happen. RICS, who are an international global body, and IFMA, who are the biggest in the world. That knowledge, that experience is there. Leverage it. I know we all want to do it our way, but we do ourselves a disservice if we continue to operate like that. We are a very small community in the big bad world out there. We need to work with each other. Let me tell you about the standards world. Here in Spain, that is your national standards body. They are responsible for the standards within Spain as a country. In Europe, we have a regional body called CEN. And all of the national bodies in Europe are members of CEN. And how this works is if you collaborate as a regional entity, like Europe, and you create a standard, then those national bodies must accept it. So therefore, those national bodies need to get involved in creating standards. CEN has already created 7 standards in facilities management. And Ron mentioned one of them a moment ago. That has taken since 2003 to make that happen. So it's not a fast process. And that's one of the challenges with standards is the market tends to drive facilities management, not standards. So the challenge for standards is play catch up, but make sure that what you produce is relevant, because then people will acknowledge and make good use of it. And then we have the international standards body, to which most national standards bodies are a member. CEN and ISO have a different type of relationship. But you probably are all familiar with some of the very well-known international standards that exist, and I'll mention those again in a moment. So I want to talk a little bit now about ISO Technical Committee 267. How many of you knew that committee existed? Can you raise your hand? Okay, less than a quarter of the room. You're all involved in facilities management. It's out there, it's happening. There's the timeline. We initiated the formation of this committee primarily based on the work that had been done in CEN, the success of what CEN had achieved. So we said, let's take it to the next level. So the committee was established very late in 2011. I ended up becoming the chairman of that, and early in 2012, we welcomed the members of the ISO community. There are 160 countries involved in ISO. We held the first plenary meeting in Berlin at the end of 2012, and we established 2 work items, and I'll talk about them in a moment. There have subsequently been several meetings in the countries you can see there. Our second plenary we held in Asia. Deliberately, we wanted to reach out beyond Europe. And the last meeting that we had was actually in April, just past, in Washington, kindly hosted by CIFMers in Washington National Harbour. And the next group meeting, working meetings, is in London this month. The 2 initial work items actually have been borrowed from CEN. The very first standard that was created in Europe was terms and definitions of facilities management. And I heard quite a long debate this morning about what is facilities management. Trust me, don't go there too many times, because you could spend the next week discussing it and you still won't get a satisfactory conclusion to everybody in the room. That's the nature of what FM is. However, we've taken the European standard and we're now internationalizing it. And you might think that's a fairly straightforward process. It's not. The 2 greatest debates that took place in Europe and are repeating themselves in the international arena is it facilities or facility? The amount of time that has been invested in debating that, and it will continue for another 10 years. And the second one is, what is the definition of facilities management? Same thing. I mentioned this morning at the workshop, facilities management does not fit in a box. Let's stop trying to do that. And you can either see that as a huge negative in comparing ourselves to our cousins in the built environment professions, such as architecture, engineering, surveying, that's better defined. Or you can see it as a big positive, because actually we're there to fill a huge gap in serving and supporting the organizations that we work for. And there is no box, nice, neat box where facilities management fits into it. Get over it. The box is defined by the customer and the client. And our job is to make sure we can respond to that efficiently and effectively. And they're 2 different things, but that's another discussion. The second work item that is currently going on in the committee is guidance on sourcing process and development of agreements in the delivery of facilities management services. This also started off life as the second CEN standard, but has been developed and evolved in the international forum. And I'll give you one example why the international forum brings quite a lot of value beyond the European context. One of the biggest problems we had in the first work item was we were using the term client. Now, for 90% of the people in this room, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with it in Asia, it doesn't mean anything. So suddenly, what we didn't think would be a problem becomes a problem at an international level. So we've had to change the terminology that we're using in the content of the standard. And that's why there's a lot of those meetings, because you have to get into that granular level of detail. These are the countries today that are participating in the ISO committee. And like everything, if you have a point of view, if you're not sitting at the table, nobody's going to hear it. And I would truly appeal to those of you in Latin America. You do have a point of view, and it's valuable. And we want it. We want you to be sitting at that table. The process in doing that is you need to contact your national standards body, and they need to support you attending this committee. But that's all that needs to happen. And although meetings tend to work much more efficiently with the less there is of people around the table, the end result and the value proposition will lose an awful lot if we don't have that diversity of opinion so that we can turn the handle on it. The end result will always be a consensus and a compromise, but if it's one that we can all then talk the same language, we've taken a huge step forward. It will never be perfect, trust me, it will never be perfect. But it allows us to go out there into the marketplace that we all operate in with one voice. Within ISO, you can be a participating country or you can be an observing country, and observing countries don't send anybody to sit at the table. Look at some of the countries that are there. And let me tell you, when we established the ISO committee, there were 4 countries that volunteered to lead it. There was the UK, because we formulated the proposal in the first place. There was Germany, and of course, those of you from Europe, Germany wants to lead everything, which we all understand. We love them to bits, but we need to pull them back now and again. The other 2 were the ones that were very interesting to me. China. China wanted to lead the ISO Facilities Management Technical Committee. And Korea. Now, if that isn't a wake-up call for us, for all of us, we now have some very, very powerful countries who are recognizing facilities management, that it exists, and they want to get involved, very involved. Fantastic news. That's just giving you a snapshot of the meeting we had last month in Washington. And that's the motley crew who were sitting round the table, working very hard for 3 days, trying to create these standards. This is the bit I really wanted to talk to you about. As a committee now that exists within ISO, we can decide to create a standard on anything. Most standards in the ISO community are technical. They tend to be the safety of this lectern so that I don't electrocute myself. They tend to be things like that that are technical in nature. But you will all be familiar with perhaps those 3 ISO standards, because they are probably some of the best known standards that exist in the world. And they are internationally recognized and used all over the world. So when we were discussing what should we be doing next in ISO TC 267, we are actually now working to create a proposal to submit to ISO to create a similar management standard in facilities management. And I believe if we can achieve that, that will be so significant to us as a community worldwide. The trouble is, ISO as a body, it's a very, very bureaucratic organization. That's why I've got no hair, never mind grey hair. They don't allow you to create management standards lightly. So you have to jump through several hoops and do it backwards as well. So we're actually at the moment gathering momentum and data to justify why we believe facilities management should have an international management standard against which organizations can measure. If you cannot measure, you cannot improve. In doing that, we need your help, because the process for ISO is proposal stage. We're only at that proposal stage. We then have to prepare the committee and the remit for it. You then start working with your committee. It goes then to inquiry to the rest of the world, gets the chance to say, this is rubbish, this is good, you should change that. You then get approval, and then you publish a standard. That won't happen any quicker than 2 to 3 years. But we need to start now. What we are currently doing is we are reaching out and we are saying to organisations with credibility, i.e. not us, if we could create a management standard that was measurable, what would that mean to you and your organisation? This quote is from the Facilities Management Department function in the UK government. It reports directly to the Cabinet Office. Why? Because they recognise there's an opportunity on cost to help dig out the hole that the UK has dug for itself in the financial situation. So we've gone to that function and asked them, tell us what you think if we could create a management standard. Would it be of any benefit, in your opinion, to the UK government? That's the reply. We reached out to an association in Australia, construction industry, and asked the same question, and we got their comments. I seriously want each and every one of you to think, do you have the connection? Do you know somebody that is of a credible nature to influence something at an international level? To go ask them that question so that we can build the case so that ISO can't say no. That facilities management is important enough to have a management standard that internationally can be recognised and measured against. So please, think about that. If you have any thoughts, any ideas, by all means, while I'm here, let me know. But David is available to all of you and known to all of you, so give us any ideas you've got in terms of helping us to go and develop that standard. Because I believe much of what we all grumble about in not being recognised and we're not at the board level, etc., it's our fault, it's nobody else's. But we're going to try and do something about it. So if you can, please help. And I would also ask you to go back, if your country was not one of the ones that's on that list, think about that. If you need help to do that, feel free to talk to us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I'm standing between you and lunch, but hopefully that has stimulated a little bit of interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stan.